Welcome back to Mental Breakdown. Today, we are exploring a crossroads that many of our clients find themselves at. It's the intersection of family law and emotional wellness. For many, navigating a divorce, a separation, or a custody battle can be one of the most stressful experiences a person can go through. And understanding the legal landscape is just as vital as protecting your mental health during the process. I am so incredibly honored to be joined today by special guest Robbie Hendricks. Robbie is a certified family law specialist and the founder and managing partner of State 48 Law Firm. He has dedicated his entire career exclusively to family law and has even helped shape Arizona law through several published Court of Appeals cases. Just a reminder to everybody listening, Robbie is an attorney, but he is not your attorney. The information we will be discussing today is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. Beyond Robbie's work as a highly respected litigator, Robbie is also a mediator, a parenting coordinator, and a former Judge Pro Tem. Most importantly, from our conversations today, he is a huge proponent of using therapeutic resources to help individuals put themselves in the best possible position for life after their case closes. Today, we are going to help you demystify the process, and we will be talking about what family law attorneys do and what they don't do, when you should reach out for legal help and how to protect yourself in difficult situations, the difference between divorce, separation, and mediation, how therapists and attorneys can work together to support families through high conflict transition. We both believe that knowledge is power when you're facing a major life change. So let's get into the breakdown with Robbie Hen. Did family law litigator. Did I leave anything out, Robbie, from your amazing backstory and history?
No, you didn't. I appreciate you having inviting me as well because we're excited to talk to you about this. We have so much respect for what you do and the area that you're in, especially from a therapeutic perspective.
Well, and same for you guys. I mean, we just really value and honor what you do for our clients that need help in some of maybe the most distressing times where families are getting divorced or maybe there's been abuse or anything like that. So we appreciate you guys so much. And I know you typically handle divorce litigation, high conflict custody cases, family law appeals. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of the really hard work when it comes to family law.
I do. Usually the ones that, and really just by happenstance, the high level custody cases with a lot of conflict, especially when you're looking at a lot of what's commonly known as fitness issues, whether it be domestic violence or substance abuse, mental health issues. I started my career in it from the very beginning, and that's just kind of extended all the way through to today. So with the high level custody cases, as well as what's known as business divorces, are typically the two categories from a general perspective that I handle.
Well, thank you for what you do. That makes me very happy just to be a therapist and just work on trauma and all that sort of thing. So before I jump into some of the questions, I do just want to put a disclaimer out for anybody listening that Robbie is not giving legal advice. He is not your attorney. He's not your lawyer on the podcast. Any information that's given is really just for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. It should not be taken as legal advice. So there's my disclaimer. You guys will probably hear it a couple times as we're moving through the podcast with different things, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into some questions if that's okay, Robbie, for you.
Yes, that would be great. And thank you for the disclaimer. You nailed it.
Well, and if I left anything out, please feel free to just correct it as well. So for questions, I think a lot of people are curious about, what do family law attorneys do? What do you specialize in? What can you help with? What kind of cases do you work with?
And it's interesting with family law. A lot of people look at it too broadly and some people look at it too narrowly. Under family law, it actually covers a lot of issues in terms of even before people get married or even if they don't get married. We have establishments where they just share minor children in common. There's also prenuptial agreements. And then even post-marriage, when we're dealing with dissolutions, that brings with a lot of issues. And dissolution being the more legal term in terms of a divorce, and custody issues that come along with it, division of assets and debts, businesses. And then there's also ongoing litigation sometimes after a decree or a final order is entered, which is unfortunate. So there's modifications of legal decision-making and parenting time, changes in support, alimony and child support, spousal maintenance is what it's called here in Arizona. So there's a broad range of what it covers. And some people don't quite understand that family law attorneys can fit all of that. And then
Yeah.
there's even the appellate aspect of it as well. If people don't agree with what the trial court did, then they can go towards the appeal. And then on the flip side of that, what it doesn't cover, we look at estate planning. That's completely different set of an attorneys. Juvenile law is separate from family law. There's quite a bit of crossover between the two. We don't do criminal. There's civil is a whole other area. While it is actually a big umbrella under family law, there's other areas of law that are distinct and separate from the family court system.
Okay. And that's super helpful. I mean, even doing what I do and, working with family law attorneys, I didn't even know that it covered all of that because I just think of it as like divorce and separation or like custody. So I really appreciate you expanding on that because, again, that was new information for me. And that's really helpful because we have clients where they need that. They need that kind of support and help. And so being able to get them to the right place, which, we always send to you guys because you guys do such a good job, but making sure that we're sending the right clients your way as well.
It can be hard because sometimes, and as a general public, to find the right attorney is sometimes you think that attorneys handle all areas of law, which that's not as common. Most people specialize in a particular area, and it can be difficult to not only find the right attorney, but then vet from there of an attorney that's the best fit for you.
Yeah. Well, and that's what we do with therapy too, is people, I think therapists do everything. Like, oh, this is a therapist, they can work with everything. And it's like, no, actually we can't. And so I think just like finding the right attorney to work with you, finding the right therapist that's going to understand your needs, work with your schedule and all of that and really be able to help. So I think our careers are similar in that way. Our professions are similar in that way.
Absolutely. And when we're looking at therapists, when we make a lot of referrals because we're a big proponent of therapeutic resources, there's whether it's for minor children, whether it's for adults, and you're looking at is there a special type of issue that's being dealt with? Are we dealing with trauma or those other things? So you're exactly right. We always are trying to find the right fit from a therapeutic perspective as well.
Do you feel like your clients are open to going to therapy when you recommend it?
It's becoming a lot better as time has gone on. It used to be we would run into a lot, and I actually was a product of that growing up myself from a personal perspective, is it's almost viewed as a negative that if you were recommended to go to therapy or if that's something that was recommended for your matter, there must be something wrong. From my perspective or in my experience anyways, there's been a shift on that where the courts, which has really picked up on it, is they believe that it's helpful even in the most amicable situations,
Yeah.
that anybody and everybody can benefit from it. And we've kind of picked up on that too from our perspective because when we were in the middle of litigation or even from the very beginning of a matter, it's who is your support? What support do you have? Whether that be therapy, friends, family, things that you enjoy doing, because this is a very difficult process. It's a very draining process. And so, what we try to do is to make sure that they are set up not only for the immediate, but for the long term. So, we've found that people have become more and more open to it, and there's not so much of a pullback anymore when it's brought up.
Good. That's really good to hear. And that's kind of what we're seeing on our side too. Is I feel like younger generations talk openly about therapy and mental health. And so it's kind of bleeding out into, like parents, grandparents, and all of that. So it's way less stigmatized. And I think it was even like 5 years ago. So that's really good to hear. When should people reach out to family law attorneys?
Yeah, there's a couple different perspectives on that. Really early and often is kind of what the general advice is. Sometimes people don't understand that we're in a very similar position as you would for a dentist or a doctor or a mechanic. Like there's a reason why we exist. Some people sometimes get an understanding or a belief that they can do it on their own, but information is very helpful. And just because you meet with an attorney doesn't mean that you retain or hire them, doesn't mean that you even have to move forward them. You can meet with several attorneys. Thankfully, there's a lot of information out there, but because of the amount of information, you also have to vet through it to understand whether it's good information or not. But sometimes the only caveat I land on that is sometimes you have to meet with an attorney when it's safest. So we always try to remain cognizant of when people are in situations that they need to meet with an attorney, but they want it to be for a number of reasons. And safety means a number of different things across people and their situations, et cetera. And sometimes they just want it to be private because they're not quite sure what they want to do. So we try to remain cognizant of a high level of confidentiality. But as soon as you start having questions, the sooner you can start exploring not only attorneys, but who might be the right fit. Because the more information you have, the better that you'll be able to make decisions moving forward and often very difficult decisions.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate that because I think when I was talking to Dana and Samantha at your firm, just kind of like doing like a consult and getting to know everybody, we talked about how none of us are marriage purists. We love the idea of marriage and happy, healthy relationships, but unfortunately there are going to be some relationships that are not safe or not healthy or not good for one or both people in the relationship. And so I think just having as much information as you can gather as possible where you're trying to make that decision has been really helpful for clients. And that's something I'll tell people of like, you don't have to do anything but do a consultation, get some information, ask some questions. It doesn't mean you have to file paperwork tomorrow, but know what you're walking into if you're at all considering it. Or if your partner is maybe threatening it, go get support, get some information. Because like you said, there's a lot of I don't even wanna read all the laws that are connected to it, but I'm sure there's a lot of, like, things to sift through and, like, different circumstances and things like that, that you guys have to be mindful of when you're working with clients.
We do, and we don't even wanna read through it all. We do. It's out there, and it's more nuanced and complicated than I think people give it credit for, and it can go both ways. The information can help make the decision less scary, for a lack of a better terms. It can be empowering, and sometimes it can bring up issues that someone has never even considered that might make them reconsider. And to your point, it doesn't mean that you have to file, and even when you file, I remind parties all the time, until a decree is entered, it can be reversed. We're always supportive of reconciliation in the situations where it's safe to do so. But it seems so final and so definitive, which we try to keep an understanding of as well, because in their position, this could be the worst thing that they've ever done in their lives. And for us, it's another day. And so it's easy to kind of lose that sympathy and empathy of what they're going through that we try to remind ourselves of consistently, that we're just trying to help them make a decision that is not enjoyable.
Yeah. And we have that a lot with clients where I think it's not the ones that are leaving an unsafe relationship. Like if there's any sort of like domestic violence, aggression, abuse, it's usually the clients who are not happy, but they don't give themselves a reason to leave. It's like, well, I should be fine. Like they're nice to me, they're kind, they're this, but it's like, but I'm not fulfilled. And so we do a lot of work on that side of like, what do you want for this relationship? And like, do we send you to an attorney to get information? Do you do couples therapy? Like, what does that look like? Or do you do all of the above? And so, yeah, it's interesting. I wish that part was a little bit easier. And a lot of times, what I'll recommend clients in that situation is the book. I think it is. I'm going to look it up because I wrote it down right before we started. Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay, because it talks about
Mm.
that relationship that's like good enough, but not happy. And it's also like bad enough to not be happy. So that kind of that weird in between.
Sure, we see that often too, where they're looking for one who we're meeting with is looking for the other side to take that first step, or they're waiting for a situation where it gets bad enough. Or often what we see is, I wish I would have done this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It would have been a different situation, because timing can be important in terms of whether it has to do with children, which that is usually a big consideration, especially if they're close to graduating and emancipating. And then some other aspects too, in terms of assets and debts, if they have some concerns with the other side. So timing is important, and I keep going back to, as far if it's an issue, meet with them early and often, because it doesn't hold you to anything that you have to do just because you're gathering more information.
Right. And you kind of have highlighted this. Meeting with an attorney doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong or bad. People can reach out and get information. So it's not like they're, needing you to get out of trouble, but it's more of like this guidance and this support on this really difficult road.
It is, and it's become a lot easier, and we can only understand it's intimidating. I can speak for myself. If I can avoid going to a doctor's office, I will. I don't wanna set it up, I don't wanna do it, I don't wanna and so meeting with an attorney, I can imagine what it takes in order to not only make the call, schedule it, show up, and then you're in an office you've never been before. And, nowadays, it's nice because things have expanded so much that we can do telephonic, we can do virtual meetings, we can do in-person meetings, we have locations that we can meet people at, as long as we can maintain confidentiality. So it's become a little less stressful versus just the one option that you had to show up in the office and meet. But even taking that first step can sometimes be difficult and intimidating.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I think we see that with therapy too, where it's like the hardest part is walking in the door. or joining the session, or making the call.
Mhm.
And so I'll always tell clients, like, you did the hardest part. You're here, like everything else from here will be smooth sailing. It might not be comfortable all the time, but like this is the hardest part. Um, I am curious if you have any free resources that you direct clients to that maybe want information but don't have the financial means to put an attorney on retainer, or maybe, even to do like a consultation if they wanted to pay for a consultation. I didn't know if there was any resources out there for that.
There are, and they're growing, which is nice. From a free perspective or no cost, the court actually has a lot of resources that we direct people to, and they're ever expanding too. In the area of family law, I think more than any other area of law, the statistics change a little bit, but you get 80+% of parties where at least, or matters, I should say, of at least one party that's unrepresented. So there's a lot of resources that the court tries to do in order to help, because they understand unlike other areas of law, you're not dealing with a business or an insurance company that may have endless funds for sometimes very high hourly rates. So the court is always a great resource to start with, both in person and online. The state bar also has a modest means project as well that will direct towards an attorney that is doing a discount as far as an hourly rate. We offer a free initial phone call with our intake attorney who handles appeals with us. That starts with an initial conversation to see if it's something that's worth setting up a consultation for up to an hour or more. We also can do sessions where it's basically repeated consultations where we're just meeting to answer questions. They're going through the process. They have follow-ups. They want us to look at drafts during the meetings, or they just want some general advice on how to move forward. Because while it would be nice if everybody could have an attorney by their side to get through their matters, sometimes that's always not feasible, but there's ways to get information to at least get to the end of the process so that parties can move forward, move on, and get it done.
Yeah. Well, and that's something we really encourage clients, because we'll tell them, look, we are not legal advice. We are not lawyers. We don't know anything about that. And so here's how a family law attorney could be really helpful. Here's what you could get from that. Here's why it's important to start meeting with them early and safely and just getting questions answered so that they know how to best protect themselves and their loved ones too.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of place, of course, online. That's where everybody's going anymore. Websites, a lot of firms, our firm, a lot of firms offer a lot of really good resources in terms of categories of laws, issues, relevant information from that perspective. Of course, AI has exploded
I was going to
recently.
ask.
Yes. And that's one where caution, because if anybody's explored that, they've probably also seen the attorneys that are suffering the consequences of over reliance on AI, and unrepresented parties who don't know that or haven't even studied the law or read about it have no idea that AI has the ability of hallucinating. And it's a very odd concept that there's this information that seems endless, but it's not accurate. And that could be harmful in a case too, and be difficult to undo when they eventually do meet with an attorney, but they've already taken steps on their own that they may shouldn't have. So while there's a wealth of information, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, being able to vet through it is almost as important as being able to access it. Mhm.
For sure. And I'm glad you talked about AI because I was going to ask you how many, like, if you are seeing a rising trend of people coming and being like, well, Chat GPT told me this because we definitely see that in therapy. Like, Chat GPT diagnosed me with whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing a high rise of it, with clients particularly, and on one hand, you just wanna make sure that you don't take any offense to it. They're asking questions, and that's perfectly fine. You should have the answers to it, and that's an aspect of it too, where it's a little bit something different from what we used to, but if they have questions and they want my answers to that, I'll give it to them. The other thing that we're seeing is unrepresented parties in our cases that are writing full pleadings and briefs with artificial intelligence, which can
Wow.
be very it can be concerning. And then, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, there's attorneys that are overusing it too, and the state bar is getting involved, and those consequences are coming down and more. So not only do clients and the public have to be wary of AI, attorneys very much have to be wary of AI too, as we're exploring this new concept that we're all having to deal with.
Right. I was like, this was not talked about in grad school when I graduated 50 bazillion years ago. But we have something similar where we now have new rules and regulations from the Arizona Board of Behavioral Health of what we can use AI for and what consents that we need. And same thing that you said, ultimately, it's liable on us if AI documents something or like leaks something, breaches something. So It's a weird concept that we're
Yes.
dealing with now in 2026.
Yeah, and everything we're dealing with from the ethical rules to the state bar, they're always trying to play catch up, which that's just how it goes. Something new tends to go a lot faster as everything catches up with it. It's, AI has been around quite a bit. People just didn't realize what we were using it for. And so now kind of the general recommendation at this point is to be careful, which isn't all that helpful or directive on things, but because it can be very helpful in some instances, including the law, and I'm sure in therapy as well, and beneficial. But it's the overuse of it immediately when we don't quite sure understand it is presenting some issues for sure.
Oh, I bet. Okay, so is there anything that couples can do before marriage to protect themselves or at least make a divorce easier to manage? Is there anything that you recommend? Not as
I
level of care, but just as information.
I do, and this is something that is something to be cognizant of too from that perspective is what it looks like to separate. Sometimes we get caught up in terms of whether to separate or not and don't explore what that really looks like. Whether that's we always prioritize children, particularly of where's everybody going to live, how are things going to be shared, how that impact is going to be on them. Do we need parents to be in therapy? Do we need to start individual co-parenting counseling? Do the children need to start with some individual therapy just so that they have a resource other than mom or dad to be able to speak to and have a better understanding of what's going on outside of children related issues? Having an understanding of what the financial picture looks like for the community estate. Often we have one or both parties that don't really know, don't understand incomes, don't understand checking and savings, don't understand the retirement accounts or the investment accounts that exist, don't understand the business. So the more that you're able to access information, especially if you're worried that the other side may not be fully transparent, the better, because it's often if someone's going to hide something, unless you know where to look, it can be difficult to find.
Yeah.
So when I categorize it from an initial perspective of do we have anything that we're concerned about from a physical or mental health safety perspective, what plan can we put in place to make sure to address that? Do we have a financial safety perspective? And then what do we look like from a timing in terms of how are we going to be able to move forward and what that looks like in the immediate? Because it can sometimes feel like a free for all when you get started until you get to the very end when there's a little bit more certainty in terms of final agreements or final orders.
Okay. And you've talked about like safety a few times. I'm curious if somebody is coming to you and let's say they are in an abusive relationship where there's domestic violence or other safety concerns. Is there anything that they should be doing to protect themselves or to, I guess, be prepared if, they're going to leave or if they're going to separate or if they're going to get divorced or anything?
And you're right. Unfortunately, I do mention the word safety a lot, and that's
No,
probably
I
the category of cases that I work in and the things that we've seen, unfortunately, in our own matters and across the valley. So we're always wanting to be cognizant of that. We're always hoping to avoid situations if we can, because these are often the worst time in people's lives. It can be a living nightmare. And if there are concerns, emotions tend to run very high, and people say and do things that maybe they wouldn't normally do, or maybe it's something that they just needed a trigger. And certainly something like a divorce can be that. So we're always looking at it from a physical safety perspective as a top priority for parties and children. So things to consider when someone's in a position that they're concerned about. Number one is, do we need to find a location that they can go to that the other party doesn't know about? How can we safely remove them from either the marital residence or the residence that they live if they're not married, in order to make sure that we can avoid a situation that may have been unavoidable had the information come out when everybody was together. And the same thing for kids. And then we have to consider what that looks like from a parenting time perspective, because that's a very upsetting situation if somebody is, for lack of a better term, blindsided that they're separating or that they're getting a divorce. And then moving to the next level is, even when you do get yourself removed, do you have the financial support to do that? Do you
Right.
have an income? Do you have friends or family? Can you limit your expenses and costs? And then are you going to be able to add attorney's fees on top of that? Because typically it takes the court anywhere from 30 or 60 days or more to be able to interject itself to enter orders in order to help with kids or finances, support, etc. So if we can put things in place to allow things to be a little bit smoother and calmer from the beginning, then we will. And the last category that we finally start talking about, if we can get situated enough from a safety perspective in reality, in terms of living and financials and et cetera, then we're looking at the timing of filing and the timing of service,
Okay.
because the service can be a very unsafe situation as well. And can we send the documents directly to that person? Do we need to set up a process server? And the timing of what that looks like. And if we need to coordinate that with an order of protection as well or not. And then sadly, since we're talking about technology, we have to look at that too. Do they have access to their location based on their phones or other devices that we need to be cognizant of, et cetera? So there can be a lot of landmines, so to speak, if you aren't cognizant of how this actually looks like in execution in someone's life versus just saying, we're going to go ahead and get filed and let's see what happens.
But I love how mindful you're being with clients, especially if there is a safety concern of like, let's zoom out and look at the whole picture so we can make sure that everybody's safe or as safe as we can ensure given the path that we're going to go down. And I don't know that a lot of attorneys do that. I think there's some that are like, yep, like, let's do it, make the money, like, do whatever. But it's like, I love that just intentional, mindful approach that your firm takes.
Yeah, it's you hope it never happens, and then
Yeah.
when you've seen it from afar or you see it up close, you remain cognizant of it and try to implement that moving forward, because it's even in situations where nobody has any concerns and there aren't even any indicators or red flags, I'll make sure to bring it up just in case, because if there is ever a time, what is our plan B? What is our plan C in case something happens? And again, in reality, I can't do much about it unless we plan for it ahead of time. The only thing that I can really do is in a true concerning situation, you've got to call the police. I mean, sometimes people forget that or they don't realize that there's an order of protection, et cetera. So the things that we can plan ahead of time to have it in place and then have a plan B and a plan C behind it can at least help us set up to where even if the other side doesn't like it and there wasn't really a concern to be had, we've avoided it and we can put pieces back together moving forward so that we can resolve things as soon as possible.
Yeah. And from the therapy side of that, ideally clients would be in therapy and like working with us and then working with a family law attorney because we do a lot of that same safety planning, assessing risk and safety. Like, do you have a go bag packed? Do you have all your documentation? Do you have cash? Like, if you like, I'm thinking of clients who maybe do not have financial autonomy, but they can go to the grocery store. And so I'm like, can you get cash back when you go to the grocery store? Can you get a gift card when you go to the grocery store that you can just start to like pile away if you're trying to get out of the relationship? And we always tell clients too, depending on the level of safety concerns that we're assessing, sometimes leaving is the most dangerous time. I mean, research shows that's the most dangerous time for any domestic violence offender to escalate and be more violent. And so, again, I think it's really good that you guys are being so mindful and intentional by zooming out and looking at all these different factors. So, we appreciate that.
Yes, and all the support that someone in your position can give them too can certainly be helpful, because timing can be important, access to things can be important, and just feeling that it's going to be okay, it can sometimes be what they're trying to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to help people walk through because I feel like when somebody's even considering it, it's like that protective part of them is like, "It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Like, don't leave. Here's all the reasons you should stay," even though, like, everything about them wants to get out of the relationship. And so helping them just have that confidence and trust themselves that it will be okay and it might actually be better.
Yes, absolutely. And knowing what to do if this happens, and trying to work through those if then situations as much as possible, and letting them know that they have to be a part of it, because I don't know their circumstances. I don't know their lives. So we have to work through that in terms of where would you go and who are your friends and family and what are your access to funds. And that's where the timing of it is. Maybe we wait and hold off until there is more of a plan in place that can be effectuated versus just proceeding forward when it could get them in a position that's even worse.
Are there basic rules and laws that divorcing couples must follow in Arizona?
There are, and that goes back to all the things that nobody wants to read anymore. So
Right.
a few of them though that we have, one of the things that people maybe don't consider at the time of filing is there's what's known as a preliminary injunction, and it comes from a specific statute that tries to keep things the same as much as possible. to give some examples of what's in there is you're not supposed to dissipate assets. There are exceptions to that of how one can utilize assets. You're not supposed to take the children out of the state unless you have an agreement or court order. So it's trying to keep things from kind of boiling over, so to speak. And the preliminary injunction goes in place when the filing party files and then when the other side is served. And then, of course, there's rules of procedure and statutes that go into effect when a matter started where people have to voluntarily hand over documents and information in terms of the community estate and how we're going to proceed forward in dividing those assets and liabilities, et cetera. So as one can imagine, it's very rule based. It's supposed to follow a certain procedure. That's often not how it goes, although that we try to keep that in place as much as possible. But as soon as the court system is involved, then there are rules and procedures that the parties and counsel are supposed to be following.
I've heard of a cooling off period. Is that a thing in Arizona? And if so, what is that? If you can answer that.
Yes, can. So the waiting period or the cooling off period is also by statute. So the idea is that it gives everybody 60 days to kind of decide whether this is something they really want to proceed forward with. That's the soonest that anybody can really file for their divorce. So from the date of service on the 61st day is the soonest that somebody can submit their decree or the court can enter a decree in order to divorce somebody. There's an exception. It's called the summary decree process. Even then, it implements a 60-day period. But there was the summary consent decree process was try to help those that all had full agreements from the beginning and try to help submit that right from the get-go. But it presents its own complications and procedures as well. One thing I always want to emphasize is that 60-day period, but two parties can have attorneys or not and have full agreements and be waiting for that 60 to pass in order to resolve their matter. And neither side ever has to step foot in court if they can remain amicable. But that's a general rule. Seems simple enough, but very hard to execute, much like everything else.
But I think that's helpful because I think, for anybody that's listening to this and maybe is considering divorce or maybe that's like on the table from their partner or anything like that, just having that timeline in mind of it's not like you're going to meet with an attorney, file for divorce that day, be divorced the next day, and like move on with your life. Like there's a lot of things that are happening in that 60 to 90, 120 days, depending on how long it takes before anything is officially separated and done.
Absolutely. And one thing I always try to emphasize that those that want to expedite it or try to get it done as soon as possible is it usually took quite a bit of time to bring those two together and to think about what it's going to take in order to pull them apart is not easy to do sometimes, especially when you're looking at it from children or accounts, businesses, etc. And the other exception that I should talk about as far as the 60-day goes that adds even more complication is covenant marriages. Now, statistically, I wish I had anything to reference. I don't, but I think statistically less than 1% of marriages are covenant marriages. Some people don't understand that they are in one or they do understand it and it actually brings fault back into the situation or could unless both sides agree to the dissolution. And if they don't agree and it is a covenant marriage, there may be over a year waiting period or more in terms of what needs to happen in order to allow them to get divorced. But very few marriages qualify as or are a covenant. I shouldn't say qualify, are a covenant marriage. So most people are dealing with just the 60-day waiting period or the cooling off period as it's been nicknamed.
How would somebody know if they're in a covenant marriage? This might be a dumb question.
No, not at all. And it's with very intentional. So there are things that you can actually convert what I guess I call a standard marriage into a covenant marriage after you're married. But typically you're applying for a very specific license
Okay.
and you're engaging in certain courses in order to I guess increase the seriousness of the situation if
Got it.
anybody needs that. It usually has a cultural or religious background, but it requires more steps and more intent, I should say, as far as entering into the marriage. And on the flip side of that, it makes it more difficult to get out or to divorce or legally separate.
Thank you for answering that because I was thinking of it like almost like using insurance for something like, oh, I thought this provider was in network and they're not. And now I have this bill. So it's not like somebody's going to get tricked into it or like anything like that. Like they would know along the way that they would be applying for that marriage license, doing the courses, working down that.
Yes.
Okay.
I never underestimate people's ability to be duped. but it should be something that was brought along the way and that they had every intention of entering into that. What they may not understood of what it meant on the back end. And that's where when you're considering a covenant marriage, looking at what that means in terms of a legal separation or a divorce, I think is often sometimes what's lost. And if you are married 10, 20, 30 years, you may not remember that you did all that. So that's usually where but usually when a covenant marriage comes across our desk, everybody's usually well aware of it.
Okay. I mean, I think I've heard that term like one time before because I think one of my best friends applied for that out of Arizona, but I
Mm.
forgot that that was even a thing until you just brought it up. And I was like, oh, yeah, like
And
that is
that's
a thing.
what's yeah, it's interesting too because every state, although there's a lot of similarities from state to state sometimes, but Arizona being in a community property state, which is in the minority of states, and every state being different in terms of their laws and across the board in terms of areas of law too. So how Arizona may handle it, a divorce, whether it's covenant or not, may be very different from what another state may do with it.
And can you speak more about the community property state that you mentioned or community property law?
Yes. From a general perspective, community property states is really comes down to the concept that everything earned during the marriage, debt, asset, or otherwise, is considered community subject to what they call equitable division. In Arizona, it really it focuses on 50-50 unless there's other reasons not to. And then anything is considered sole and separate that was either owned prior to the marriage, obtained after the date of service,
Yeah.
or was inherited or given as a gift. It's the nuances kind of go on from there in terms of transmuting property from sole and separate to community or community and sole and separate. Then there's also community lien claims. And the community may have a claim on a sole and separate asset that increased in value during the marriage.
Okay.
But the general concept was the idea that when you are in a community property state, both parties are equally contributing to what the community is amassing so that regardless if one party was working or not, they both contributed in their own way. Now, a lot of people may take exception to that as far as their own relationship, but the general principle is that if you're in a marriage, both of you are working in that marriage in an equal capacity, and that's likely how they're going to divide up the assets that were obtained during the marriage.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything, well, I guess, would a prenup help or like who should get a prenup? Would it help with the community property or anything like just to set things up maybe in a different way before there's a marriage?
They can help, and even Arizona case law talks about how prenups are supposed to strengthen marriages. That was the idea behind them, was to make them simpler, to make them have an understanding of how they were gonna handle, whether it be finances or debts, etcetera. So, really anybody can do one. Typically, everybody has the understanding that at least one of the parties or maybe both have significant assets that they want protected, and that could be you could be involved with a business and you may have other business partners and founders and you don't want them to get wrapped up in a divorce proceedings. This has been a number of years ago now, but people may remember that the Los Angeles Dodgers at one point were being ran by somebody else because the owner was involved with a divorce. So it can help protect business partners. It can help protect extended family who knows that they are in a family business or they have an inheritance that might be on their way. Sometimes it can be a very thoughtful process of understanding that they don't want to involve other people outside the marriage in their divorce process. And that's really what a prenuptial agreement should be for, is to provide both sides' ability to be amicable in the event of a legal separation or a divorce, to have a complete understanding of how you're going to utilize your finances during the marriage. Because there's some that will want to say, I'm going to waive community property entirely. And this is how we're going to handle anything that we earn during the marriage. Some just want to protect what they have going into it, but know that anything that they do during the marriage is going to be community. And some people do a hybrid. So it really allows people to put a lot of thought into how they're going to handle their incomes and their finances and their debts during the marriage. And of course, in the event of a divorce or a separation, it's supposed to provide clarity and simplicity to avoid conflict. They don't always. And of course, if the terms are written a certain way, they can be very difficult to execute and even add to the conflict. It's it's something that should be a consideration for almost anybody, but it's also from a community property perspective, anything that you own prior to the marriage is sole and separate anyways. So it may ultimately not be a good fit. But again, information is helpful. So the more information you can at least have to to understand if it's a good fit for you can sometimes be helpful.
Yeah. Well, and that's something, when we're working with couples like premarital and we know that there's going to be an engagement or a marriage, we have conversations like that of, okay, how do you want to set up your finances? Not that we're financial advisors, but how do you want to set it up so that if there is conflict, do you do separate accounts? Do you put it all together? What does that look like? What are your beliefs on parenting? What are your beliefs on money, spirituality? And so we try to cover all of those bases just so people can be prepared when they're making that step to get married. And it sounds like the prenup, that's something we could also encourage clients to do if we feel like, or if they feel like it would be appropriate, but give that as a resource of this might be something that could be really helpful. And again, go consult with a family law attorney, get information, get an understanding of what would be best for you.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's very similar to the concept of therapy. Honestly, it used to be such a taboo, or you would mention it and people would pull back as if they were offended by it. But similar to the concept of therapy, the concept of prenups have kind of thawed over the years that people are
Mhm.
less and less concerned or worried or offended by it and recognizing their value as well. So we're actually being able to have more and more conversations about them that were less stressful than they used to be.
That's good. So I know we are winding down on time, but I have a couple more questions for you, or if you have any questions for me. I think one of my questions was, is there anything that you would want therapists to be doing or not doing when a client is planning a divorce, going through a divorce? Is there anything that we could do to help or at least not get in the way of?
And that was actually a very similar question that I had for you of ways that we can be helpful in terms of from our perspective as well. And from a therapeutic perspective, I think it's very limited. The help that and the support that is provided is usually nothing but positive. The only times that things can kind of get concerning is when I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this is not necessarily they're stepping into the shoes of the attorney, but they're giving advice on how things should be handled. Or they're supporting ideas that they haven't actually talked about with their attorney, that they come to us believing that this is the right thing to do and this is the way to negotiate and this is who I'm dealing with and this is how we're going to mediate and this is how we're going to strategize with the case and this is how aggressive we're going to be because I need to feel empowered that I'm not going to be pushed over anymore. I'm not going to be abused anymore. And they're going to use the kind of the legal process in order to get that validation or that empowerment, or even sadly, some of that payback that therapists, even knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes support, which can be unfortunate because we have to kind of unwind that. And I don't want to necessarily say, well, don't listen to your therapist on this. And I just try to come out of it from a legal perspective of like, this is why this won't work. I certainly understand it. And I can agree with you from a real world perspective. But in this world that we're operating in, the family court world, this is unfortunately what we need to do. And sometimes I'll even get a waiver in order to speak with their therapist and say, let's have a phone call with them. Let's get a better understanding. But those are few and far between. Vast majority of it is they're very helpful to actually keep clients calm, to process their emotions when they want to make decisions that would be harmful or will add conflict to their matter. I don't know how many times I have to say, these are the things that we can do. I understand why you want to do this, but I want you to recognize how this could really explode the conflict and the fees and the costs in your matter. And they don't have somebody to talk to other than me
Mhm.
to be able to work through that and maybe come to a calmer decision. And that's where someone in your position can be just invaluable for us.
Well, and I appreciate that. And so you guys know, and anybody listening, therapists cannot give legal advice. We can't give medical advice. We can't even practice outside of our scope. And so, like, because I specialize in relationships and trauma, I'm not going to be working with eating disorders because I would be incompetent. And so, anytime we're working with a client or a couple, family where there is divorce, the therapist should be saying, talk to your attorney. That's a great question for your attorney. Or could you ask this question? We have no idea what the answer is going to be, but have you thought about this? Ask your attorney. So, we should be directing people to you guys in terms of like, get the information there from the experts because that's not us.
Yeah, absolutely. And from your perspective, I mean, what are, I guess, typically your recommendations that maybe an attorney in my position could help support? We're always looking for this, may be a little simplistic, but we're always looking for book recommendations. I used to hand out those a lot more than I do now, classes, courses, and of course, individual therapy. But is there anything from your perspective that you believe, oh, I wish somebody would have either mentioned this, supported this, or said this from the legal perspective in your experience?
I mean, I think I'm going to answer it a couple different ways. I think if it is a client that we're working with, or let's say you guys send us somebody, if you feel like it's going to be high conflict or that the court's going to request our records, that would be helpful to know ahead of time, just so that we can make sure that we're making the notes as appropriate as possible. Granted, we have a legal and ethical obligation to do that, but sometimes, like I'm thinking of some cases where, we were working with the kids, there was abuse by one of the parents that was reported, it was in the notes, then the court did a court order to have the notes from therapy. And it's like, what's going to happen with that when that parent sees that the kid just said this? And so being able to kind of like protect the clients in that process and also know what to expect on our side.
Oh, that's very helpful to know, and that's a very important aspect too that I don't think people realize is they think of HIPAAs, of course, as being
Yeah.
very stringent, and when it comes to family court, we're probably going to get access to it, and that's a very interesting dynamic that's fortunate and unfortunate, as they can be very helpful, but also sometimes people tend to weaponize therapy, which is too bad. I guess there's always a drawback to every good thing, but yeah, that's an interesting aspect from it, because I don't think people give enough credit to the fact that we're likely going to get those medical or those mental health records. And if we don't, then it could even be used against them, which sometimes I don't think people put enough consideration to.
Yeah. And it's not like we're documenting for like legal purposes in a court of law or anything like that. It's more of like, how can we set this up and protect the client so that if this information were out, not everything that they've ever shared in therapy would be out. So I think that. I think the other thing that's really important, just in terms of our laws and regulations, is in order for us to see a kiddo client, a child, a minor, we need both parents to consent.
Mhm.
So that's best practice. In Arizona, I think legally, and you could correct me if this is wrong, but I think you only need one parental consent, but it takes one to consent and one to withdraw consent. So best practice is to get both parents to sign off, consent, be involved in therapy. We do a policy of neutrality. So unless there's like a major safety concern, whatever one parent is being told, the other parent's going to get the same information. So we're going to share across the board so that nobody's surprised. Some therapists don't do that, but what we find is like if we're working with this kid for, let's say, 2 months, and then the other parent gets pissed off because court didn't go the way that they wanted, they can be like, you can't see my kid anymore. I withdraw consent. And then the kid is just left high and dry. So we always try to do that and get both parents to sign off on it.
We try to support as well. Legally, if somebody has what's known as final authority or sole legal decision making, they can technically make that decision without the other parent's consent. But we have, over the years, have learned that that's not the ideal situation for the therapist. So to get both sides to agree, unless we have a court order, is usually most helpful. And we always try to make sure that the therapist is aware of the conflict and the potential litigation for it. And there's a lot of therapists that'll step aside and just say, no, that's not the type of work that I'll do. And going all the way back to the beginning of our session of being able to know and have a good fit for that particular therapist, because there are therapists that will understand and know going into it that there's going to have to be neutrality. There could be litigation. The notes could be discoverable. I mean, that can be an issue, because sometimes, unfortunately, therapy has to be a little bit more forced than we would want it to.
Well, and with those cases, it's a higher chance that we get a board complaint from one of the parents. And so, having specialists in the field that work with high conflict or court involved cases. And so we have a list of those providers, like mental health providers, that I would be happy to put in like the podcast notes and share with you guys, just in case if you guys don't already have it, we're happy to share that.
Well, that would be great. We're always trying to keep our roster because it's very similar to us. We know that the therapists are there to protect and support, and they do. Very similar to lawyers too, whether it's online assassination or going to the psychological board or going to the state bar. When you enter into these high conflict situations, there could be repercussions for it from the party or somebody else that is unhappy with the situation or the outcome, even if they don't mean it. It can lead to situations that aren't great for the providers that are just trying to help in the situation. So it's very important to be cognizant of all that as well.
Yeah. We had a case like that. I won't bore everybody with the details, but yes, I'm like having flashbacks to that as you're talking about it.
I have too many that I'd like to think through.
Well, and I know you had asked about books, so I'll share some of the book recommendations before we jump off and wrap up. Parenting Apart is a good book by Christina McGee. Co-Parenting 101 by Michael Thomas or Disha Philaw. For individuals, so that's more for like parenting. There's a bunch of kids books too. And I can leave those in the podcast notes as well. For individuals, Let Them is a really good book. Untamed, anything by Brene Brown is also a really good book, just in terms of like authenticity, being imperfect. You're the One You've Been Waiting For is another good book too, that talks about codependency and breaking away from codependency. And then for couples, we tend to recommend Conscious Uncoupling, Rebuilding When Your Relationship Ends, and then that Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay. I probably recommend Conscious Uncoupling and Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay the most.
Nice. That's very helpful. I mean, I heard of some of them actually, which is good to hear that at least some of the things that we're still handing out are recommended.
Right?
But that's very helpful to have that list because they can be the books and the reading material that people can get their hands on, especially when it comes to parenting and co-parenting. That can be very helpful.
Definitely. Well, I so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me.
Yeah, same to you. It was so nice to be invited, and hope that it was helpful because it certainly was helpful for us.
Yeah. Well, and helpful for me too. So I'm hoping that anybody listening is getting good information or at least a plan of where to start. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge.
Absolutely.